Thank you all for coming. So the name of the presentation is Go Node Without Code. Obviously, you probably know that because you read it on the schedule. But I'll admit when I start here at the start, that I kind of tricked you a little bit because it's not really Go Node Without Code. We're not going to write no code. We're just not going to do any server-side JavaScript stuff. But this title isn't quite as catchy as the other one, so I just decided to go with the shorter one. So the idea behind this presentation is you may already have a backend at your whatever your app you're developing, whatever website you're building, and you're not interested in necessarily doing server-side JavaScript and using Node that way. But there's actually quite a lot you can do with Node. There's a number of command line tools that are built with Node that can really help power your workflow and improve the things that you do. And I'm going to show some of the ones that I kind of liked. There's a lot of them out there, so I'm not obviously covering them all. But I'll show you the ones that I've liked, and hopefully I introduce you. You might know some of them. Other ones hopefully you haven't heard of. But hopefully I introduce you to a few of them and then kind of entice you to check out some of the tools that are out there built on Node. So a little bit quickly about me. I work at Adobe. I also blog at remotesynthesis.com. Don't ask me about the domain name. I'll explain it to you later if you want. Anyway, and I'm also a frequent author. I present from time to time. And recently, I just got to share this because it's a bit of a passion project for me. I launched this site called Flippin' Awesome, and I've had a lot of authors writing articles and tutorials for there. I used to run the Adobe Developer Connection at Adobe. Not running it anymore, but so I kind of love doing that. So this is a site that I launched. Hopefully a few of you have actually been there. So anyway, check it out when you have time, please. So as I said, I'm going to walk through some tools. Some of you may already know some of them, but they're all very useful. The first one is UglifyJS. And I don't know if any of you have heard of UglifyJS, but it can do a number of interesting things like beautify your code, compress your JavaScript code, and things like that. And you can use it as a command line tool to do these things really quickly. So I'm going to walk through how that works. All of these things basically install the same way. So I always show you the install. There's one exception, but it's pretty much npm install UglifyJS, and the -g is just to make it global so you can use it anywhere, right? So this is how you'd use UglifyJS via the command line. You'd actually use the command UglifyJS. I'm going to tell it what files I want inputted so that I can actually put multiple files that I want to combine them all into one file, and then I can tell it what I want to do with them. In this case, I'm going to beautify them, and I'm going to compress them, and then I'm telling it which file I want to output. So let's go ahead and I'll show you how that actually works. So let's see, UglifyJS. Oops. Sorry, I gotta get out of this folder. Uglify. All right, there we go. So I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm actually going to go up here and I'm going to copy this command. And I'll show you the code that I'm going to do this on so you can understand what it's going to do. So we've got brackets, UglifyJS. So I've got these two files here, index.js and utils.js. If you notice, I've purposely made them really ugly just to kind of show you what UglifyJS will do when it beautifies your code. So like the indenting is a mess and stuff. It's got a number of little issues that you'll see later. And this is another file, utils.js, just has a little function here, and intentionally ugly as well. So you might have a coworker that writes code like that. So, oh, sure. I'm actually not sure how to do that here. Hold on, give me one sec. Oh yeah, the increase font size. There we go. Tell me when it's good. Better? Good? All right. So, as I said, it's intentionally ugly. Hopefully you don't have a coworker that writes code that looks like this. But if you do, you can use UglifyJS to rectify that problem. So I'm going to paste that command here. As I said, this one is going to take those two files, it's going to beautify it, it's going to compress it. One other thing I want to point out before I do that. So the two files, this one is 11 lines long, and this one here is about, let's see, So we have 135 lines. So we have 146 lines of code. So just so you can see when it finishes, what the result looks like. All right. So when I run it, it's a little bit small there, but it's warning me actually. It's found variables that I didn't even need that I had included in the code, so it went ahead and removed those for me. It's got arguments on events that weren't necessary either, and it found those and it cleaned those up for me as well. And it's actually going to have generated here. Let me refresh the files. And here's my index clean. As you can see, it's nicely tabbed. And it's a total of 93 lines of code. So it looks cleaner. It's fixed some issues, and it's actually shortened my code. Obviously, the tabbing doesn't look quite as nice with this giant font, but and the line breaks. But anyway, it's actually quite nice. So there's a ton. I've only kind of covered very quickly a few things you can do with that. It has support for source maps and other compression options and mangling and so on and so forth. So I definitely recommend checking out Uglify.js and adding it to your workflow. Another one. So these are all front-end development tools, and many of you may already know Sass. I don't know if all of you are familiar with Less, but Less is similar in some senses. It's for building CSS, but it offers a lot of features that you don't necessarily get in straight CSS. Some of those features are like being able to add imports and mix-ins. I can add variables, like in this case, I've got a sidebar width that's 200, and I can reuse that anywhere and only have to change that in the one place. It's got functions, so these are built-in functions like that one. There's some up there that are actually darkening a particular color value by a particular increment size, and it's got this nesting ability to be able to say, so when you write CSS, you often have like your multiple blocks of header.navigation, header.logo in this case, right? So rather than having to have multiple blocks, I can nest it, and it's a little easier to read and things like that. So Less, actually, the compiler is built on Node, and you run it via the command line. So obviously that's how you install it, pretty basic. Their compiler, their command line tool doesn't have a ton of options. Actually, it's pretty simple. It's just Less C, and then you tell it, well, okay, this is my input file and this is my output file. Now I'll show you how that works because it's pretty basic, but it's worth looking at. So I'm gonna let's see here. We got close these. Got some Less files here. So this is a couple of just simple sample Less files I've taken. You can see that this one in particular has, at the top here, you'll see some variables and some of the functions and stuff going on already. Same with this file, and this one actually imports that other one. So I'm only going to go ahead and run the compiler against the one file and generate the CSS for me. So let's see. So all I do is, once again, just to save myself typo errors, just going to paste it here. All right. So once again, refresh, and there is my styles.css, which I could include in my web page, obviously. Now, Less does actually have a way of including a JavaScript that will you could actually this would be compiled in the browser, but probably not recommended for production sites. So you'd normally want to compile this and then use it. So, and you may be saying to yourself, well, that's great. Oh, whoops. Here's some other usage. You can get some other usage information. There's a lot more to Less, obviously, than what I've covered. As well, I wanted to mention that Stylus does have a command line tool also built in Node for compiling. Theirs has a number of other options. I just don't know Stylus, so I didn't cover it. But anyway, the point is, you may be saying, well, okay, Less seems great, and so does Uglify.js, but it's going to be a pain if every time I want to do this, I've got to sit there and run these tasks and and clean up my code and compile my Less and manually via the command line do this, right? That's not really helping me. It's just adding steps to my workflow. So that's where I want to talk about Grunt. How many of you have already heard of Grunt? And how many of you use it? Okay, so a number of you are already using it, but it seems like everybody's heard of it, but only maybe a quarter of you are using it. So hopefully, if you're not already using it, by the time you're done, I'll convince you that if there's anything in this presentation I think that you find interesting, Grunt is probably the most useful. The one thing about Grunt, though, so a little bit of history, going back to like when Grunt first came out, it actually had a bunch of built-in stuff. So there was built-in tasks that you could run, and there was built-in scaffolding that you could automatically do. That changed for good reasons. What would happen is you would install plugins for Grunt, and then the new version of Grunt would come out, and so you'd update it, but you hadn't installed globally, and then you'd start to run into errors with you'd use this version of Grunt for this project, but that version of Grunt for that project, and you'd get into problems. So they changed that so that it kind of decouples all of that. But that being said, it made it, I think, in my opinion, a little bit harder to as an introductory, to introduce it to somebody who isn't already familiar with it, because the process of getting started is a little bit more complicated. But I'm going to walk you through that so you can see, and hopefully you can choose to get started and use this in your work. So the install here is a little bit different because there's multiple tools going on. So there is a command line tool which you actually install. It's not install grunt, it's npm install grunt-cli. And that will install the grunt command line tool. And then there's also a separate scaffolding tool if you want to be able to use the scaffolding features, which you need to install grunt-init. Okay, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the scaffolding. So there was a bunch of scaffolding that was already built into Grunt originally when it started, and now they've kind of separated those out, and you can get those. So there's scaffolding. I'll show you how this works in a little bit for the Grunt file. I'll explain that later. jQuery plugin and stuff like that. There's also a lot Grunt. The amazing thing about Grunt is it's got a great community behind it. So anything, even if they're not built by the project itself, you'll find that there's tons and tons of community stuff out there for it. So after you've got those two things installed, and this is not specifically about Grunt, but we're going to need to create a package.json. And you can actually, so package.json is part of Node Package Manager. Probably most of you are familiar with it. And you define the dependencies for this particular project, whatever app I'm building or whatever. In this case, I've actually just got a simple, very, very basic sample one. You notice I've got no dependencies there. I can actually generate one just by doing npm init, and it'll give me some basic stuff if I want, or you can just kind of hand code something that's pretty simple, right? So I've given my project a name, it's got a version, but I've listed no dependencies. My dependencies obviously are going to be Grunt, because in this case I have to install Grunt per project that I want to use it on. I've only installed the command line tool and I've installed the scaffolding tool, but I haven't actually installed Grunt. I have to actually put that on each individual project I want to install it on, and it listed as a dependency with the particular version of Grunt that I'm using. Right. So rather than have to hand code that, you can actually just do npm install grunt on that project and use the -- save dev, and it's going to go ahead and add that dev dependency for you. Right. And now Grunt, where Grunt power comes in is in all the tasks that you can add. There are no built-in tasks anymore, so you have to add the tasks that you need. There are a number of what used to be the built-in tasks in the early version of Grunt are now all called these Grunt contrib projects. So there's a ton of them. Let me show you the site here. So this is the list of the Grunt plugins, right? That all mostly just tasks and things like that. The ones with the stars here that all start with contrib, these are actually maintained by the Grunt project. So those are not community built. Those are built by the Grunt project. All these ones below, which, as you can see, this kind of page goes on and on and on, so are community contributed ones. So pretty much I can almost guarantee that whatever it is you're doing, there's probably a Grunt plugin that takes care of, will help you automate some of that task. So as you can see, there's just tons of them. So in this case, I actually want to install let's say, if I want to install the entire Grunt contrib library, which includes a number of different tasks that are really useful. I'd just do that grunt-contrib. I don't have to install the entire Grunt contrib. I can use individual ones as I need them. But in this case, that would be how you'd install Grunt contrib, and adding the -- save dev will add it to your dependency. So let's close this. I'm going to show you so it makes sense. Actually, it's in here. So once I run that, I would get the package JSON that I showed you before would now have Grunt with the version and Grunt contrib with the version number on it, because I've already installed it there. I'd walk you through that, honestly, but it takes a long time over Wi-Fi. It's going to flake out. So All right, so now you can see our package JSON is already updated. All right, so now let's imagine I want to use the scaffolding. As I said, there's a lot of scaffolding out there already. There's some pre-built scaffolding for things like for common JS modules. There's scaffolding for jQuery plugins and other things like that. It'll automatically generate some of the files you need with some of the with some kind of basic stuff written in. In this case, I'll just show you an example. I'm scaffolding a grunt file. Now, to add the scaffolding, it's a little bit convoluted in my sense. I mean, it's really not that hard once you understand it, but like if I'm showing this to somebody who's new, it's often like, okay, really? That's what I have to put in on the command line? So you can see that top line, which might be hard to see from the background. Yeah, I'm actually cloning the Git repository for the grunt file scaffolding. And I put a note here because I'm on Windows 8, and the instructions that are on they have really good documentation on the grunt site, but the instructions give you the wrong location for Windows. So in case you're curious, if you're on Windows, that's where I found it. Anyway, so because you want to clone that into your grunt init folder. So it's under npm node modules grunt init. Depending on which computer you're on, if you're on Mac or a PC. So you're going to clone that scaffolding project into your folder. So any scaffolding you want to use, you put it in there. You also can write your own scaffolding as well. I mean, that would probably be a recommended way to go, but that's just if you want to use the pre-built ones. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. So I'm going to run the grunt file so you can see what it generates. So let me. Okay, so again, this is kind of hard to type with this computer up this way. I'm just going to copy paste it. So I'm going to generate a grunt file. So it's going to ask me a bunch of questions. Any of these scaffolding generally do. So is the DOM involved in any way? Sure it is. Am I going to minify files? Yeah. Am I going to have a package JSON? Yeah, I am. Do I need to make changes? No. All right, there. It's now generated my grunt file for me. This one isn't the most amazing scaffolding because it only actually spits out one file. But if I refresh this, I've now got a gruntfile.js. Okay, so gruntfile.js is where you specify all where you define the tasks that you want to create. So, and what plugins you're using with Grunt here. So, in this case, just as an example, and relating back to the ones I showed you before, we've got an UglifyJS task. We've also got ones like JSHint, QUnit for unit testing, and one of my, the ones that you're going to love is the watch task. So now, if I can actually use Grunt I can configure options for like how I want to use UglifyJS, what files I want to use it on, and so on, and then I can automatically like tell Grunt, okay, go ahead and run that UglifyJS task. But even better, I can now add UglifyJS, for instance, to my watch task, and I can have it watch any files or folders and automatically run that anytime those files are changed. It's going to go ahead and run that for me. So I can like say, my coworker who writes really ugly code, like every time he makes a change, I automatically fix his code for him. So not me, I write awesome code. Anyway. Right down here, it's defining these are all the different plugins that I would use. Obviously, this is a default one. You can modify this however you like. And here, I've got the task. This is my default task. I can have any number of tasks. This is saying, okay, every time I just say grunt in that folder, it's going to go ahead and run JSHint, QUnit, concat, and uglify. Right? And I can define other ones and other groupings. I can modify that default one however I like. Right? So this is how we build and define tasks. So, as an example, for instance, let's see. There's the Grunt contrib project includes the less compiler, so it's really easy to kind of define. Well, okay, I want to say take that sample CSS and generate me, or sample less and generate me a sample CSS, and then I can add it to my watch task, right? By saying, okay, every time a less file is changed, go ahead and run the compile and automatically generate me the CSS file. So that makes using something like less a lot easier. And I can combine that with a number of different tasks. So in this case, right, so, oops. I'm going to show you, because in this folder I've gone ahead and installed all the all the necessary dependencies. Oh, no, it's not Grunt. Oh, Grunt finished. Sorry. Finished. So all I got to do in this folder, so I'm going to show you what's in here. Grunt finished. So I've got my package.json, which I've installed Grunt contrib. I've installed Grunt for this particular project. And I've also got my Grunt file, which is pretty, it's got a few tasks here. A lot of them I'm not going to use. But my watch task is configured to use that less task that I showed you before, which then looks in my assets folder, looks at the samples.less, and will automatically generate me. So just to kind of show you how that works, I'm going to go ahead and run just the Grunt watch task. Okay, they're running. Okay, so I'm going to open sample.less. I'm just going to make a simple change, save it. And if you go back here, you'll see that it actually tells you, okay, I did something. I completed task right now. So if I refresh my folder, you'll see that my sample CSS was generated for me automatically. So now I can edit less files and have those automatically generating the CSS and testing that in the browser within a matter of seconds, right? Obviously, you can use Grunt for a ton of other things, which hopefully you will. So I already showed you the list of plugins. There's tons and tons of them. In fact, whoops, went the wrong way. In fact, we're going to talk about one as one of my next ones. This one I think is kind of neat because it covers something a little bit different than you might be used to. So imagine if you create these art files like in SVG, SVG using like Illustrator or whatever, and you want to create a bunch of icons like ping files and CSS that allows you to use those icons, well, GruntIcon will do that for you automatically, and it's really cool. So, all right, so that's how you install it. The one tricky thing about GruntIcon is, it installs pretty basic, npm install grunt-grunticon, which actually you would probably want to add the --save dev because this is going to add it to your So it'll add it to your package.json for you. But you do need something called Phantom.js, which is a headless WebKit, and that's how it goes ahead and runs the process that creates all these images and so on. And the one trick, if you'll need to make sure that it's on the path, because you need to be able to access it via just on the command line saying Phantom.js and have it run. If it can't access it that way, it's gonna end up failing. All right. So I'm going to show you how that works. Now, I am a terrible artist, so at least on the computer anyway. I know I work for Adobe, but I really don't know how to use Illustrator at all, I'll admit. So I went ahead and just stole a bunch of SVG files. This is actually from the GruntIcon page. They'll show you the example. But I'm going to just show you how you actually use it. So here's all my SVG files sitting here in this source folder. I've gone ahead and already installed GruntIcon. So let me kill the command task. The white watcher. All right. So we're going to see GruntIcon. All right. So in this GruntIcon folder, I've got a GruntFile.js. The only task I'm running right now is GruntIcon. So you'll see that that's my default task, and I've already installed it. I'm saying take anything in this source folder and then generate all the files and put them in this output folder. Pretty easy. So I'm just going to run, since it's my default task, all I got to do is run grunt. It's going to take a second because it's got to launch Phantom.js, but actually that worked even quicker than I thought. So this one I'm going to show you, well, no, not here. Here. I'm going to go here because it's easier to see the result. So now there's actually an output folder. In that output folder, there's another folder that has all the pings that it generated based on those SVG files. Even cooler, it's given me several CSS files that I can include. And it gives me a loader to know how to load those properly, but it even built me a preview so I can see all the different classes that it generated and what icon that would display on my page. So you can see it did all that little. This allows you to kind of easily have a reference for using it. Anyway. So again, that's only kind of a little bit about what you can do with GruntIcon. There's a little bit more of it. I already talked about that, and I already did the awesome demo. Okay, so just check out the GitHub repository here. It's by filament group GruntIcon, and they've got a lot of documentation there on how to go ahead and use this if it would be useful to you. So this one's kind of fun, and I've met almost nobody who's heard of this particular project called Automaton. So this one is very similar to Grunt in that we're going to create tasks, but the tasks are a little bit different than Grunt because they're really they're a lot more about command line, file, and directory type tasks. But I found that you can actually do some really cool things, and because one of the things it does allow me to do is even execute arbitrary command line. Anything on the command line via this, I can create a task and it has pretty much anything. Let me show you. At this point, installing should be pretty basic. So these are some of the available tasks. If you do any work on the command line with files and folders, you pretty much know these, I think. It does have some scaffolding as well, and I'll show you how that works in a little bit. So that's kind of neat. But you can do some really neat things with this, and it integrates with Grunt. So if you're already using Grunt, you can use Automaton to do some extra things and tie that in with Grunt. So the tasks look very similar to Grunt tasks. In this particular case, I'm actually, as you can see, I'm making a new directory called www, and I'm then saying, okay, imagine I have a bunch of files I use as default for starting a new site. I'm saying, okay, take all those files in this folder and copy them into my subfolder of www, right? So, oops, went the wrong way. Dang it. All right. So I'm going to show you how to use this on that simple task, and then I'm going to show you. You're going to be like, okay, well that's cool. I could probably do that on the command line by myself without it in less time. But then I'm going to show you something cool because this is a simple one to give you the idea, but then I'm going to show you a little bit more complex one to say, well, that's give you an idea of the power of what you could do with it. All right. So on my Automaton folder, so instead of gruntfile.js, this has autofile.js. That's the task that I showed you before. You basically go to the folder where I've installed it. So this is Automaton. And I'm going to run, I'm actually just going to run Automaton, right? Because this is my default task. So what it did was, you see there was nothing there. Now if I refresh here, you'll see, okay, it copied my www, all the files from my folder externally and copied them into here. So, like I said, that's somewhat useful, but not hugely useful. So what I decided to do was I built a much more complex task. I actually wrote an article about it. So it walks you through all the different pieces. And what I'm going to do, since it requires a good internet connection, which I don't necessarily guarantee we have, so I recorded it, and I'm going to show you what it does. So, all right, play. Oh, come on, big pause button, go away. All right, so I don't know why that pause button does not go away, but that's kind of obnoxious. So one of the cool things is I can supply different variables to it. So in this case, you might be able to, it's hard to see probably on that screen because it's a little blurry, but I'm actually telling it what directory I want to create. So I'm supplying it like a name for the directory, and I'm supplying it name for the project. That name for the project is going to be used in the scaffolding because you can put, you can do like, use the curly braces to put things that you want to replace in the scaffolding. So I go ahead and I run that autofile task. It does the copying of those folders. It copies over a grunt file. It copies over a package.json. It replaces some things out for me and creates all of this in a folder that I specified in that command. Then it goes and it installs. It runs npm install and then it pulls down all of the dependencies that I defined in that package.json, and it goes. So you saw it kind of very quickly go by there, but it went ahead and pulled down. You saw it calling npm, pulling down all the dependencies, and then it went and ran the watch task so that I can immediately start coding, and it'll automatically start compiling my last files or running UglifyJS, and all of that I did with just running Automaton, right? And all of that happened automatically. So that's kind of an idea of like what you could do with it. That's a little bit more complex and would actually save you some time. So this is the site for Automaton. It's by Indigo United, and it's pretty cool. Definitely recommend checking it out. So the last one I'm going to talk about today is really simple. So every time you see I see a new getting started with Node tutorial, it's always about creating a web server, right? Which gets a little old as far as getting started tutorials go, but it's actually kind of useful for certain things. So in this case, HTTPster, which I guess is like hipster. Anyway, it's just a really, really dead simple static server. So sometimes when I'm developing, I'm only doing like some basic JavaScript stuff and CSS and layout and so on, and I'm working in a local folder. And the file, I can use file protocol to access that, which works just fine most of the time. But there's actually a number of things that will flat out break when you use that. So sometimes you really want to have a local server that you can just fire up really quickly and test things, right? And that's all this project is. So that's the installs. Basically the same as everything else. So just to start a local server, all I do is I have a folder set up just to make it easy to show. So I'm going to go to that folder, and I'm going to HTTPster. Now by default it's going to start a server on port 3333. So there's my site. The nice thing about that is I can actually fire up. I can define the particular port that I want, so I can fire up any number of. I can just specify the port, and I can fire up a ton of these on different ports, and I have a bunch of local servers running if I need to test multiple things or, whatever I want to do. Now. That's all cool, and I mean it's useful for some basic testing. If I want to be able to fire this up really quick, but I actually have some slightly more complex needs for testing, there's another project called NodeStatic, which I am going to actually show. I think we have plenty of time. Moved quick. So NodeStatic is essentially the same, except that NodeStatic allows me to an HTTPster. NodeStatic allows me to specify, using JSON, a number of configuration options. So in this case, I've actually specified like a cache control, and I even told it like what refer I want and so on, right? So I can then, and I'm going to copy this from, this is another article I wrote that shows you how to do this if you want something in a little more detail. There you go. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paste that here. So I'm telling it to load up that JSON file that I just showed you in that folder and use that for the configuration of my local server. So now if I go to localhost 8080, same site, but I'm going to show you, open my developer tools, go to network, I need to refresh. So if we scroll up here, you can see that actually, you can see down here my cache control is what I specified there, as well as my refer. So if you need to do some slightly more advanced testing, this allows you to specify headers and all kinds of stuff like that, if that's what you need to do. And it actually will list out everything that loads up, like what it's serving up for you. So it's a little more advanced. Another neat one. Sorry, Control C. Yes. There's actually another one I should mention is there's a live preview built into brackets that's actually has a Node server on the back end, and when you click the live preview, it'll launch in Chrome. It'll launch a window with that site running. The neat thing about that is I can actually edit CSS and stuff and see those changes happening in real time because it creates a connection with that. And so any changes I'm making, well, number one, if I'm making changes to HTML, those will kind of live reload for me. But CSS will actually change in real time, so I can hand code here and maybe have it on another screen and watch that change. Now, one of the cool things I talk about using these things are really simple, but the coolest thing for me is if you do any mobile development or testing, or if you're doing like responsive web design, so I can actually fire up these local servers. And I don't know if, how many of you have heard of a project called Edge Inspect. It's also an Adobe product, but But it allows you to do testing on like your multiple devices. So I can hook multiple devices up to Chrome and have them browse along with me at the same time. So like anything I'm viewing in Chrome will actually show up on any devices I connect, and I can connect unlimited number of devices, really. I can even remote debug those, take screenshots, and so on. And so the connection to using something like this, a simple little local web service, I can work on my design and start laying that out. And because I can test stuff that's running on a local host on my devices, I can actually use Edge Inspect to then just quickly fire up a server and load up Edge Inspect and see that on any of my devices automatically without really doing much configuration or anything. I just get this up and running in a minute. So just an idea of how you use that. So I know this ran short. Funny enough, I gave this before, and it took me the whole hour. So I must have really breezed through for you guys, hopefully. But anyway, hopefully I've shown you a couple tools that you haven't heard of that you might consider using. Also, obviously, there's a ton of Node command line tools out there. So even if you're not interested in using Node for server-side JavaScript development, I definitely consider installing it and looking at some of these command line tools and figuring out how you can add them to your workflow. Specifically, the automation stuff like Grunt and Automaton, I think is really awesome, and you can start to kind of get rid of some of those really tedious, repetitive tasks that maybe you do for every single project, and just automate them and hit a button, hit the command line, type in a command, and boom, done. So anyway, I'm open to questions if anybody's gotten any. You can also email me anytime and find me on Twitter and so on. So, thank you.